This happened to me a few years back when I was in my early 20s. At the time, I worked in a department store at the makeup counter. The job relies heavily on good customer service and building relationships because you want people to keep coming back and spending money on your products. We're given personalized business cards so that we can build our own client base. Pretty important for a commission department. It's not uncommon to be familiar with people who frequently shop in the store. As workers, our training is focused on being friendly and accommodating. One day while I was working, I had to move a makeup counter that wasn't my own to cover someone else's lunch break. It was really slow, and I was just leaning on the counter, people watching. I could tell most shoppers were just browsing, so I kept it to myself. One of the people I noticed was a very tall, broad man. He walked very slowly, almost hunched over. His face was fixed very aggressively, like he was angry, but focused. He circled around the corner a few times, but I could feel his gaze on me as he instead of the products. After a few rotations around the department, I decided to greet him in case he needed some help. It wasn't until he came directly over to me that I realized how big he actually was. I'm 4'10", 140-pound female, so I feel pretty small regardless, but even with his slouched posture, he was over 6 feet tall and well over twice my weight. I'll never forget his teeth. They were completely black in the front. Your eyes couldn't help go right to them. Despite his menacing appearance, he was soft-spoken. Truthfully, I couldn't tell he wasn't all there, and by the way he talked. He told me no when I asked him if he needed help, but requested my number. So direct. We had never spoken before. I declined and said that I was in a relationship and it would be inappropriate. He then asked if I could have a business card for the counter just in case he wanted to get products. Since I wasn't on my normal counter and I really wanted him to go away, I handed him my coworker's business card and told him to call if he had any questions. It worked, and he walked away well after that, filling me with relief. Only a couple minutes later, the phone on my counter rings. I answer it with my peppy customer service voice saying, "Thank you for calling, makeup brand name. How can I help you?" And immediately I know it's the same guy when he starts talking. He asked me again for my personal number, and I explained to him once again that I cannot do that. He just wants to talk, he explains. Since he wasn't getting the hint, I say, "I should have told you that I'm married. You can't have my number." Politely, he apologizes and hangs up. I thought that would be the end of him, but for the next few weeks or so, I spent so much of my time at work anxious that he would show up. I would see him every week, and he would lurk around the corner looking at me. Anytime I would see him, I'd immediately drop what I was doing, run, hide, or go to the nearest customer and offer a bit of assistance to make it look like I was busy so he wouldn't talk to me. I successfully dodged him every time. It came to the point where I stopped seeing him. I was thrilled. I had almost completely forgotten about him until one day I decided to go to Walmart by myself to pick up a few things on my day off. I generally like to shop alone, and I can take all the time I need. I was leisuring around. I grabbed a basket and made my way over the cosmetic/hair/wellness section, since that's where most of the things I needed were. Typical girl stuff. I only managed to grab a few things before I locked eyes with him as I walked to the supplement aisle. I had recently changed my hair color and wasn't wearing my work uniform, so I didn't think he'd realize who I was. I was ready to just go about my shop until I noticed that he dropped the items that he had in his hand and started heading my way. I panicked and stiffened my pace immediately. I thought to myself, he's not going to follow you through the store, right? But as I turned to look around, I could only see his humongous body plowing through people, with that terrifying look on his face, only meaner, his black teeth growing closer with the snarl. Since the direction I was walking was opposite of the exit, and there were no way in hell I was going to turn around, I decided that my best course of action would be follow the perimeter of the store and cut down the center section, which would bring me closer to one of the registers. I speed walked the entire time in hopes of losing him amongst all the people, but never once turning around again. By the time I made it to the register area, I could actually feel him behind me. Still not wanting to turn around to look, I glanced at the reflection of the soda machines that are in between the register aisles to see how close he was. To my horror, there was only 1/2 to 2 feet between us. I was afraid to just drop my stuff and run out the door in case he followed me to my car. I parked in the far back of the parking lot, and I did not want to risk that. I also did not want to get in the line at the register since the lines were long and I would just be standing out in the open, alone. Instead, I walked to the cluster of people crowded in the self-checkout line. I noticed another large but older gentleman with his carriage in the middle and ran straight for him. The people were so close, and they were clustered together, so the man who was following me couldn't cut through. I ran over to the man in line and grabbed onto his cart. I said, "I'm so sorry, I'm not cutting you, but there's a man that's been following me through half of the store and I need to stand with you." He was so sweet and let me be with him while we waited in line, and even then didn't let me go ahead of him so I could leave quicker. As I was cashing out, I could see in my peripheral vision my stalker staring at me and pacing around. And he couldn't come near me since the self-checkout is somewhat sectioned off. By the time I had finished and grabbed my receipt, I couldn't see him anymore. I looked around, but he was nowhere, and I thought about asking the older man to walk with me to my car. But I decided to call my boyfriend and make a run for it. Staying on the phone, I explained to him what was going on as I sprinted to my car in tears, frantically looking around in case he tried to follow me outside. I made it to my car safely and rushed home, breaking down to my parents about what just happened. I could feel it in my bones that that man wanted to do something to me, and thankfully I didn't find out what it was. His aggressive aura was palpable. To this day, I can still remember the adrenaline, nervousness, and the sheer terror I felt when he followed me. I had never been so vulnerable and helpless, even with all those good people around. I quit that job roughly 2 years later. I had only seen him one other time there since the incident, but I didn't still live in constant fear that we cross paths again. I'm afraid to shop alone, something that I wouldn't give a second thought 2 years before. So to my stalker with black teeth, let's not meet again.
I was enrolled at a private school in Brandenburg, Germany at the age of 10. On weekends, I would stay with my parents in my apartment, but during the school week, I would board in the dormitory. Spending 5 nights a week at a German boarding school is much less creepy than it sounds. In fact, we would usually sneak around the halls at night. Nothing really faced us. There was a long, narrow room we dubbed the PlayStation room, with a dozen PlayStation consoles inside. The door was frequently unlocked, and so we would often visit, there were 6 of us, and just sit around, playing these games late at night. I had been in Germany for 5 months when my parents had to return home for a funeral. For 2 weeks, they left me in care of my aunt and grown-up cousin, who lived in Nauen, a nearby town. Their apartment was small and quite far away, so I ended up spending most of my nights at school for those 2 weeks. On Saturdays, there were only 2 other students in our dormitory by night. One of them was a much older boy with whom I never saw eye to eye. The other was his mentally handicapped twin. I'll call him K. The first Saturday night was boring without my friends, and I found that I couldn't sleep. I was missing my parents a lot, despite being a fairly independent 10-year-old. So on the second Saturday, I decided to take a trip to the PlayStation room. I climbed out of my bed, but Kay heard my movements and decided to get up too. Feeling guilty, I explained where I was going, and he asked if he could come as well. Kay had a very problematic speech impediment and spat a lot when he talked. Conversation was always difficult. I agreed, hoping to calm him a little, and so we both made our way down the north end stairwell onto the second floor. I played a wrestling game for about 20 minutes. Kay mashed a controller happily, convinced he was winning. After a few matches, I lost against the computer and Kay started cheering very loudly. I tried to get him to stop, but Kay just laughed it off. Realizing that we might be caught, I quickly launched out of my seat and ran, full tilt, back up to the dorm. I felt guilty for leaving Kay, but was pretty confident that he wouldn't be punished on account of his handicap. When the dormitory door opened again, I feigned sleep. I heard 2 sets of footsteps enter. One of them was clearly Kay, the other sounded much lighter and softer. I presumed it to be a teacher. Straining my ears, I heard Kay saying, "I love you," over and over. He would always say this to teachers, especially when he was in trouble. When the other person responded, I heard a teeny high-pitched voice saying, "He's not sleeping." I immediately got chills. The voice was totally unfamiliar, and there weren't many faculty members who I didn't know. I heard Kay slip back into bed, but the light footsteps never retreated. That night, I felt a constant presence in Kay's corner of the dorm. There was a strange kind of breathing, a lot like hospital apparatus, which continued for what felt like several hours. I barely slept, sweating through my pajamas, duvet, and sheets. I've never been more terrified. The following morning I went swimming with Kay, his brother, and a few teachers. I met Kay in the shower afterwards and told him I was sorry. I also asked him if he was caught by a teacher last night. He shook his head and told me that the stick man was trying to rest and needed his room, or something to that effect, and also that we should stop playing where the stickman is staying. I should stress that Kay's impediment made this hard to understand, but I'm fairly sure it's what he said. After we were dressed, I cornered Kay and tried to question him further, unsatisfied with the story he had given in the showers. We talked for a few more minutes, but, as always, conversation with Kay was a trial. He eventually pulled a notepad from his bag and handed it to me. I leafed through it. The whole book was full of doodlings, all fairly innocuous, save for one page, where a tall, stick-like figure was drawn. I noted that it was missing its arms. Kay looked at me and nodded. I told all of my dorm mates as soon as I could, and thankfully they believed me. After that, we never once snuck out at night again.
The story took place when I was 11 years old. I was in the 6th grade during that time. Our class had a field trip. We were going to go to this camp that had been existing since the 1930s. When we arrived, it seemed normal. The girls' cabin looked pretty nice. We were going to stay at the camp for 4 days, so I was going to miss my family. On a Wednesday night, we had just finished hiking. Me and my 2 friends, let's call them Nebula and Jaguar. The 3 of us returned to the girls' cabin because we were tired and I was going to go take a shower. Once I finished showering, I came out of the bathroom because my friend Nebula wanted to brush her teeth, so she could go to sleep. I was drying my hair, and all of a sudden I heard Nebula screamed and jumped off her bed. I asked if she was okay. Our friend Jaguar was already asleep. The look on Nebula's face still haunts me to this day. Her face looked absolutely terrified. Nebula then pointed at the window. I looked and saw nothing but the trees outside and the darkness since it was 10 p.m. I looked at Nebula confused because I saw nothing. Nebula then told me she saw a man in a tuxedo wearing a hat. She told me that he was outside watching our friend Jaguar sleep. I looked at the window again and saw nothing. I told her she was probably just imagining it. Nebula didn't say anything after that. She just looked at me with a scared look on her face. I told Nebula that we should probably go to sleep because our teachers might find us awake and we could get into trouble. Nebula nodded and went to her bed and covered herself with her blanket. I went to my bed and fell asleep. The next morning we ate breakfast with our classmates at the small cafeteria. Nebula still had that scared look on her face, so I asked her if she was okay. She nodded yes. But I asked her why she looked scared then, and she told me about the tall man in the tuxedo. I told her that that was all in her head, but then she gave me a serious look and said that she was wide awake when she saw the tall man. Nebula brought out her small notebook and drew the tall man. When she was done drawing him, she gave me the small notebook. I looked at the drawing. Nebula was pretty good at drawing, and she did draw the tall man. Scary. The tall man looked like he was wearing a 1920s tuxedo outfit, and he had sharp teeth. Nebula also drew our friend Jaguar asleep in the drawing. In the drawing I could tell that the tall man was watching our friend Jaguar asleep. I asked Nebula where the tall man's face was because I didn't see it in the drawing. I could only see his mouth in the drawing. Nebula then told me that she didn't see his face clearly that night. She said the only thing she saw was his sharp teeth and his 1920s tuxedo outfit. I started laughing and I said, "What if it's Slender Man?" I started to laugh again and Nebula just looked more worried. I realized that in the drawing the tall man was wearing a hat, so I told Nebula that it probably wasn't Slender Man, because Slender Man doesn't wear a hat, right? After eating breakfast, we went hiking with some other kids. I don't remember their names. There was these 18-year-old high schoolers that were taking care of us, and Nebula wanted to tell one of the high schoolers about the tall man that she had seen at night, because she was so scared. We went up to one of the high schoolers. Let's call him Pickle. Pickle was about 18 years old at the time, too. So we went up to Pickle and Nebula started explaining to him about the tall man in the tuxedo. Pickle then told Nebula to sleep with the 6th grade teacher, since she was so scared. Pickle also told us to turn on our lights if one of us got scared or something scared us. After talking to Pickle, we returned to the girls' cabin and Pickle walked away with the boys to the boys' cabin. That night, Nebula was so scared to sleep. Nebula told me that she wanted to go home so she could be with her mom and grandma and her 5 cats that she owns. Nebula has no dad, by the way. I told Nebula to calm down because I actually enjoyed camping, but like Nebula, was scared. I told Nebula to sleep with me. My bed was pretty big too, so 2 people could fit on it. Jaguar was already asleep while me and Nebula were talking. That night, Nebula went to sleep. The next day it was normal. Nebula wasn't so scared anymore. It was like the last day, finally, and we did our last hike. Then we had lunch. We were sitting at this one place. I don't exactly remember where, but we were chatting and eating with these girls. Let's call them Acorn, Jellyfish, and Jupiter. We told them about the tall man in the tuxedo. Then Acorn told us that she saw something pretty creepy too at night. Acorn said that it was around 3 or 4 a.m. and she wasn't asleep yet because Acorn was thinking about her family. Acorn was laying down on a bed. She told us that she turned around and she was looking at a window. While she was looking at a window, she told us that she saw something very creepy that passed by her window. Acorn said that it was a ghost or something. Acorn said that the ghost just passed by her window very fast. The only thing Acorn remembered about the ghost, it was just dark. Like it just some dark ghost passing by a window. She also said that the ghost had liking glowing eyes or something. Then we went on the bus and we got back home. I told my mom that it was an amazing trip except when Nebula was being scared. I enjoyed that trip like a lot actually, and it was one of my favorite memories from 6th grade. Nebula did like it too, but she just didn't like the part when she saw the man in the tuxedo. It's been a while since that happened. I asked Nebula if she still had the drawing of the tall man, but she told me that she doesn't have it anymore because she threw her small notebook away a long time ago. Anyways, I feel like it was all in Nebula's head and that it wasn't true. Same with Acorn. I feel like it was all in her head too. What do you guys think? Do you believe in Nebula and Acorn? Or do you think, were they just seeing stuff? Let me know what you think.
Last year, I had a very strange experience in the National Forest out in California. I was by myself on a road trip with my dog, and I was driving pretty far into the Mendocino National Forest. I like to camp in national forests/parks because it's isolated. My dog can roam, and they're free of charge. A trade-off for sketchy/rough drives into parks, sometimes in a lack of service/assistance, Yeah. Anyways, I was driving up this dirt road, kind of curling up a mountain around maybe 5 p.m. It was pretty nice out, sunny, warm, with a slight breeze. Nothing serious happened, but I felt extremely uncomfortable driving into the area, and the feeling never let up. Driving up the mountain, I felt like I shouldn't stay there, and I even texted my boyfriend about it for as long as I could before my phone completely lost service. I was looking for a sign of another person having been around the area lately, but I didn't see anything. I pulled over and got out of my car with my dog to look over the edge and noticed a dead squirrel and some broken glass mixed in the dirt and gravel road. Yuka, my dog, started to growl slightly. She's vocal, but I've almost only ever seen her growl at another dog. I did see her growl at a possum once, so it could be something she smelled, maybe? This place continued to make me feel a little bit on edge, but I pride myself in being an independent traveler and backpacker, so I decided to continue and at least a bit further with my grumbling pup to see if I could find a good place to camp. I continued to notice more dead animals. Keep in mind, no one is going to be more than 5 to 10 miles per hour up this thing, and if there's anyone even there, I hear male voices. They sound close, and I think I should call out to them, so I stop my car and then kind of freeze. I can't really make out what they're saying, and I don't see any sign of people anywhere. So I get back in my car and continue to drive forward and cautiously look for where the voices could be coming up from. I've never ran into people in national park or forests when I've gone this deep in. The unsettling feeling grows from these voices, which sort of come and go, and I give up and begin to turn my car around. I honestly don't remember how Yuka was acting on the way down. I was scared and focused on getting out of there. I just distinctly remember being surprised at her grumbling when we were standing outside my car. Kind of dangerously quick, I went back down the mountain, not seeing any sign of anyone. I decided to spring for luxury and get a hotel for the night. I figured I was fine. Huge and open spaces can be intimidating, I told myself. And the voices could have been echoing somewhere far off, and they just sounded close. Animals die, glass gets broken, nothing happened. Cool. But I remembered this place. It sticks with me. Whenever I'm watching scary movies, if I'm walking my dog in the woods at night, nothing compares to the feeling I had driving up the mountain, and it's honestly kind of interesting to me, as well as frightening. I recently happened across some information as well as some Native American lore that made me feel extremely uneasy. Fast forward a year, I've mentioned this place to a few people and the haunting vibes it gave me, but nothing much more. Googled the national park once, didn't see anything, but I didn't look much either. I like scary movies and things out of nature, hence my fascination with this little event. So my boyfriend and I were coming up on finishing our road trip just yesterday. We were in Wyoming for a wedding. There were only 2 to 3 hours left and the sun had set, so we decided to listen to some scary podcasts and YouTube videos. We went from NoSleep podcast to the X-Files and ended up on a true stories video dealing with Native American lore. I'm only half paying attention, petting my dog, playing Pokemon on an emulator, and I hear the narrator mention Wendigos. Very briefly says what they are and casually mentions that they can mimic voices. I mean it when I said I had the most horrible chills I had ever had in my life crawl down my spine, and I stare at my boyfriend and ask him if he remembers that national forest I was freaking out about last year. He says he does, and he reminds me that he texted me, and I was probably close to a Wendigo. I remember saying that, but I didn't know how much about all the lore, and thought he was just being funny, and yeah, Bigfoot is probably stalking you or some other dad joke. And he was like, no. I mean, I was mostly joking, but I said it specifically because you were hearing voices that you couldn't find a trace of. I felt strange as fuck, and I started Googling Wendigos, etc., etc. They're allegedly able to mimic human voices, and they would live in that sort of area. It all matched up. Obviously, there's a ton of questionable info out there, but I tried to find more reputable sites and authentic experiences. I then specifically looked up missing persons in the area, and the first headline that catches my eye is "Another family goes missing in Mendocino." And I went through different websites and news articles of people going missing, but they are all a little hidden underneath national park websites and pictures of trees. I remember looking up the forest about a year ago and didn't really see anything, and realized that these stories didn't seem to be talked about much, which also piqued my intuition. It stated that there were well over 100 people in the past 8 years that have gone missing, and none of them have been found. It just as my intuition super spiked. Remembering how unsafe I felt and how much I wanted to get out of there terrifies me, and I felt so uneasy about what I was hearing. And to this day, my dog and I are very close. She was a stray and she started following me. I ended up bringing her home from Costa Rica, so her little growls along the way make me feel like there was something wrong, even though it was just a storytelling video. These stories originate from somewhere. I've done a lot of solo traveling, both in and out of the country, and have never had such a bad feeling. On top of seeing unnecessary number of dead animals in the national forest, which just seems strange, I don't think I'll ever be doing more solo traveling unless it's around civilization. Does anyone know about this authentic Native American lore, or has anyone else had a kind of inexplicable experience like this? Extra points if you've had bad vibes in Mendocino National Forest from a Wendigo.
Hello everybody, my name is Denver Dark. I'm 19 years old, fresh out of high school, working as a park ranger at Caledon State Park in Virginia. My job is pretty easy. I don't usually patrol the park. My job is to sit in a radio room and wait for people to call in if they need assistance. This can range from someone needing the bathroom door unlocked to a drunken fight. A couple of months ago though, I had an encounter with some type of creature, or maybe even an alien. I'm not sure at this point. This forever scared me, and I will always be paranoid of the forest. It was a normal evening at the park. I looked over at the clock on my desk as it clicked over to 6 p.m. Well, here goes to another night by myself, I said out loud as I saw all of the other park rangers packing up to leave. Another hour passed, and as I was eating my dinner, static started coming through the radio. After a couple of seconds of just the static, a girl's voice started to come through. Hello? Hello? Is anyone there? I paused for a second. After chewing another bite of my food, I had never heard anything like this over the radio before. So I picked it up. Hello? This is Officer Dark here. Yes, she yelled before continuing her sentence. Please help me. Something is chasing me. I was dumbfounded. The creepy part was she didn't even say someone. She said something. I quickly calmed myself before responding. Calm down, miss. Tell me where you are so I can send help immediately. I'm at the old watchtower on the northeast side of the park. I ran here after it chased me out of my cabin. Please, please send help. I think it's close. It's alright, miss. I'll send out I was cut off by her. I stopped talking, listening to the radio. Then I heard a very soft but aggressive growl come from the speaker. Oh God, it's here. As she finished her sentence, I heard a crash of a window and a large thud on a wood floor. The radio cut out. I was in complete shock. Did I just witness someone die? After about a minute of me being absolutely glued to my seat with terror, I started to gather a plan in my head. I spun around in my chair and grabbed the old park map off the desk next to me. I unfolded it frantically. Scanning it, looking for an old watchtower, there it was, on the northeast side of the park, just like she said. To the looks of it, it would take me about an hour to walk there. I got up from my chair and walked over to the gun cabinet, unlocking it with the keys I had in my pocket. I grabbed the first gun. I saw a 12-gauge shotgun along with some extra shells. I also saw the flare gun on top of the shelf and decided to take that too. Before leaving the station, I made sure that I had everything that I needed. Shotgun, flare gun, flashlight, radio, pocket knife, and the map. I'm not gonna lie, I was scared to go out into the woods after that whole event. I also hated the idea of being alone, but I knew I couldn't just sit there and do nothing. As I exited the station, I was greeted by the cool breeze and a beautiful sunset of a summer evening. All of the night bugs and animals started to come out. I could hear the calling of the cicadas in the trees while the crickets buzzed below them on the ground. It's weird, because you wouldn't think that such a breathtaking scene could hold such horror that the lady experienced. Since it was a long walk, I started moving at a faster pace than I normally would. As I was about 10 minutes away from the tower, everything changed. Once an amazing sunset now turned the forest into a pitch black that no person could see into, along with the deafening sound of silence as the cicadas and crickets stopped chatting. This was extremely odd. I had been in this forest many times at night, and nothing like this had ever happened. A few more minutes of walking later, and I saw the old watchtower. It was about 70 feet tall or so with a hut at the top of it. The watchtower had seen its better days. The wood looked very old, with it being damp and cracked in many spots. At this point, I was at the base of the tower, right before I was about to go up on the first step. I got the worst feeling I have ever felt. My head started to spin. I was very nauseous and started to see stars. As this continued, I thought I was going to pass out as the darkness around my eyeballs started to grow. Everything stopped. I was normal again, except for one feeling. It felt like something was staring at me. I swear, I could feel its eyes piercing into the back of my head. Its glare almost felt sharp, like a knife had been jamming into my side. I spun around as quickly as I could, holding the shotgun in front of me. Nothing, there's nothing, I thought, until I scanned the tree line in front of me, about 50 or so feet out. Oh my gosh! I let out as I see deep in the forest a pair of two vibrant green eyes staring at me. I was struck with fear, my eyes not being able to leave the sight. My feet almost cemented into the ground. After about a minute of me staring at it, it winked at me. It winked at me! After this, the eyes disappeared and went back into the bush. I didn't know what to think. The only thing that I knew was not to stay in that spot. I ran up the old wooden stairs as fast as I could, but then I remembered the radio call I had gotten earlier. I prepared myself for a bloody scene, but when I reached the top of the steps, the hut was empty. No blood, no body, no lady. The most disturbing thing of all, though, was it looked like this place hasn't been touched in years. The floors and desks in the room were both completely covered in cobwebs and dust. A large radio sat on the desk. It must have been the one that came through to mine, but that too was engulfed by the webs. Something very strange is happening. I just couldn't figure it out. On the edge of the desk was a stack of very old newspapers. My curiosity took over and I picked one up. Date, 1978. Headline, woman attacked and killed by the Wampus cat. Locals say this didn't make any sense. This couldn't be the same lady I just contacted. I needed to find out more, so I kept on reading. The next thing that I read sent shivers down my spine. The Wampus cat resembles a very large black panther, most known for their very bright green eyes. My blood ran cold. I needed to get out of this place right now. Right as I shoved the newspaper into my pocket and was ready to run, it was too late. Before I could turn around, I heard a sound. That same damn bone-chilling growl I had heard on the radio. I turned around as fast as I could, raising my shotgun. There it was, the beast itself, the Wampus cat! This cat was massive, quite possibly the biggest mammal I had ever seen. It stood on all fours at a staggering height of at least 8 feet tall. It had deep old scars all over its body, probably from people like me. Its paws were the size of a small dinner plate, and didn't forget its face. The lips were completely bared back, showing its dinner knife-like fangs. And the most important thing of all, those dang green eyes, almost staring into my soul. Waste any time and pulled the trigger, sending a slug at my target. I landed the shot, but it barely did anything. The cat staggered back when the slug hit him. But that's about it. How is this thing still alive? The round had left a bloody hole in its torso about the size of a dollar coin. But at last, the creature was pretty much unfazed. I decided to run for it, booking it to the exit, only to be stopped by the huge feline pouncing on my back and pinning me to the wood floor. The beast raked its long claws across my back, leaving an extremely painful wound. It felt like I was being burned with a hot iron. I could feel my shirt already being soaked with blood. I managed to flip around on my back to face the beast, holding its head away from my face. Although I was able to keep its head at bay, I wasn't with the paws. It started swiping at my face, leaving those searing claw marks on me again. I tried to reach for the shotgun on the ground next to me, but I wasn't able to. Blood from the gashes started to seep into my eyes, stinging them, not allowing me to see. With nothing working and all of the blood I was losing, I started to give up, thinking about all my friends and family, and ideas sparked in my head. I reached in my pocket and pulled out the knife I had forgotten about. I flipped the blade open and immediately stabbed the cat in the neck with it. The beast reared back in pain, leaping off of me. This was my only chance to escape. I quickly got up and snatched the shotgun before sprinting down the stairs. I had a head start, but the cat was catching up. As I reached the bottom, it was already halfway down. I didn't have any time to spare. I ran immediately to the trails, not looking behind me. I could hear the big heavy footsteps of the beast on my tail end. I knew eventually it was going to catch up, so I turned around, pumping 2 more slugs in it, staggering it again. I could tell it was hurt, because it was moving a lot slower. I fired again in its direction, landing another shot with a bloody splat. Then the cat, it stopped running, turning around and slowly jogging the other direction. It finally gave up. This didn't stop me from sprinting back to the station. I used every bit of strength and willpower to make it back. As I busted through the door of the building, the biggest wave of relief came over me. I had won. I had beaten that thing. After attending to my wounds and grabbing a glass of water, I sat down in my desk chair, thankfully to be alive. While reaching into my pocket to take out my phone, I felt paper. The newspaper. I pulled it out, scanning the article once again, realizing that I missed something before. The woman's body was found in the watchtower of Caledon State Park. Her body had been mutilated, even missing some of her limbs. Even though she was killed, many people of the park say that they could still hear her, calling for help just like the same night she was murdered. I was completely shook. I didn't know what to think. Was it a ghost or maybe a spirit? And right as I put the newspaper down, the radio buzzed, playing that same voice that started this all. Hello?
Back in 2016, I lived in a small apartment near 12th and Valentina, the same main street as the airport, and if you go several miles down Valentina, you can visit the Saguaro National Park. Though the street becomes more of an off-roading past Wilmont, it's more or less of a straight line. My boyfriend and I lived out there in an apartment, and we took this old truck up there. I'm not an expert on automobiles of any form. All I know is that it was a Chevy, and my boyfriend, we'll call Adrian, would often talk about the lift kit he put on it, so that it was raised even higher off the ground. If I asked him, he could probably give me a lot more details on that truck, but that's not important to the story at all. All that's known is it's great for off-roading, and we often went up in the mountains together. It was a cloudy day in November, and I'd say it was still probably 80 or so degrees out when we went to spend the day at the national park. We'd been planning this for ages, and I was really excited for this. But that was all going to change. I remember this, since it's been haunting me for 3 years. We had spent the majority of the day hiking and smoking weed in an assortment of different locations, just enjoying the cacti and snacks we brought along. And it was starting to get late, and it was going to be winter, so it was dusk around 5 p.m., and yet we weren't even back in the tuck by 8 p.m. We were inside. The truck was off with the windows open. I was hitting a bowl when Adrian put his hand up. Having thought he wanted some, I was about to offer it to him. Before I could speak, he put his hand over my mouth, held up a single finger. Having been sat in the dark for hours, my eyes were well adjusted, and the glow he pointed out to me in the distance took all of my attention. What appeared to be some sort of firelight was about 100 or so meters in front of us. But behind us was the sound of movement. It was like a group of animals thrashing around. Adrian turned on the truck, keeping the headlights off to roll up the windows before promptly turning it back off. I was so out of it at the time that I wasn't even really sure what was happening. All I was sure of was that he needed me to be quiet and remain alert. When the thrashing sound came closer, it was apparent that it was stomping and chanting. They were clapping and chanting about Santa Muerte. Now Adrian doesn't speak Spanish, though he's full Mexican. He just never learned. So I ended up whispering the translations to him, and it was like one of those prayers on the candles you can buy. It spoke about the holy death for a blessing, but I don't remember what they wanted very clearly. I do remember was the slam of the hand on the hood of the truck, and the wild eyes of a boy. He looked to be somewhere around 17, 18, 19, 20. Not very old, but not a young teen. He had white paint around his eyes, and it haunts me in my dreams. To the best of my knowledge, this boy, all who knew us in that moment, Adrian swore, but he didn't move. Instead, he just watched the boy, and I watched him. Adrian always has been the type of guy who's confrontational, and he's always been insistent on solving any issues we face. He's so damn insistent, and being someone who hates confrontation, I was rather reliant on him to face the issues for me. The boy yelled for the others to surround this truck in Spanish, and in the moment, something in me snapped. And keeping my eyes trained on the mirror on the passenger side, I told him to reverse. Darting my eyes back and forth between the boy and the figures coming out of the cacti as Adrian reversed and turned in a huge jerky motion before hitting the uneven road. We were originally just parked at the side of the road. The feeling of being watched, hunted even, compelled me to tell him to head downtown, where we ended up spending a few hours at Shot in the Dark, a cafe that's long since closed. For 2 months following that night, I gradually got more and more paranoid about it. And though Adrian tried to convince me that I was overreacting and there was no chance that we'd ever encounter him again, I just couldn't believe him. Despite how desperately I wanted to, it was when we were nearing the 3-month sunset night, and I previously fixed the hand dent, but they heavily multiplied. It was like dozens of hands tried to peel the metal to get in. I haven't had any other issues since Adrian and his truck got fixed and he sold it. But recently he bought a similar one, and the paranoia has been seeping back into my bones. When I'm not at work, I don't leave my house unless I'm going to be indoors, because I can't risk the thought of them finding me again. The thought of finding me vulnerable, alone or not. I can't remember what they wanted, but I remember the way he smiled when he mentioned wanting to get into the truck and have us surrounded, and I would rather I have never found out what he planned that night.
Bart Schleyer was a famous outdoorsman, woodsman, hunter, as well as a playboy. He was a trained scientist who worked for the Grizzly Bear Recovery Project in Yellowstone National Park in the 1980s before moving north to Alaska. He was one of the world's foremost experts at capturing, radio collaring, and tracking tigers, and spent months in Russia working to help save endangered Siberian tigers. He also had a Russian girlfriend, Tanya Perova, and they had a son together, Artyom. Bart was born to Dr. Otis Schleyer and his wife, Lula Rose, in Cheyenne, Wyoming in 1955. Dr. Schleyer, a physician who practiced in Cheyenne, loved to hunt. He often took Bart along from an early age. Bart's sister, Claudia Downey, tells of Bart's childhood obsession with animals. He didn't just like them, he wanted to know everything about them, study where they lived and how they lived. My dad took Bart with him on safari to Mozambique when he was 10 years old. He had a chance to witness an incredible variety of animals that he could only otherwise read about. When he finally got a chance to hunt, he was drawn even closer. Hunting seemed to give purpose to his studies. Bart would draw pictures of animals and continued to develop as an artist into adulthood. Bart focused on his education on wildlife biology and transferred to Montana State University, where he received his master's degree in 1979. Professor Don Collins taught an undergraduate class called Man and the Environment for more than 20 years. Dr. Collins says, Out of the 4,200 students who took that class, Bart was a standout. He was quite knowledgeable in everything wild, from animals and birds to flowers, trees, and shrubs. Bart spent a great deal of time alone in the mountains while working on his thesis, The Activity of Patterns of Grizzly Bears in Yellowstone. And it was as if he prepared his entire life to do this. He was superbly suited for the demands of the job. To conduct these studies, Bart used live capture techniques and then placed telemetry radio collars on the bears to monitor their activities. After college, Bart stayed in Montana where he worked for Fish and Game and the Interagency Grizzly Bear Study Team. He made vital contributions to a team challenged with determining the reaction grizzly bears demonstrate following encroachment by humans. And it was also important to know the habitat requirements and birth and mortality rates of the bears, including those living in the remote Bob Marshall wilderness. His experiences in backpacking and self-reliance fostered through years of bow hunting made the research work easy for him. He stayed out in the mountains for months at a time. Packing meat for bait and heavy cable for foot snares became routine. He didn't just endure physical hardship, he enjoyed it. Schleyer organized his life so that he could spend as much time as possible in the field, and he was about as tough as it gets when it comes to the outdoors. He would love using a traditional bow and the arrows that he would make himself. In September 2004, Bart went off for a trip in the Canadian wilderness. His last contact was on September 14th, when a chartered float plane left him at the larger area of the Reed Lakes in Canada's Yukon Territory. Reed Lakes is on the southern slope of the Selwyn Mountains, about 175 miles north of the town Whitehorse. The nearest settlement is Stewart Crossing, about 15 miles from the lakes on the road from Whitehouse to Dawson. When the plane returned 2 weeks later, the experienced woodsman was gone. Strange, as he was no city slicker and knew how to handle himself in even the most remote wilderness and could be described as a survival expert. He was well equipped for the trip, with 3 action packer crates with enough food for at least 2 weeks each, clothing, and camp gear such as a tent and an inflatable boat. He was reported missing on September 30th, and the Royal Canadian Mounted Police promptly launched a comprehensive search and found nothing of Schleyer. According to the RCMP, he had lunch or supper in camp since the remains were found, and the rest of the food was still in the crate. He had used his boat and paddled it down the lake around half a mile from the camp. The Mounties thought there was a possibility Schleyer might have hiked out to the highway. However, with the deteriorating weather, they called it a day. Dib Williams, a friend of Schleyer's in Whitehorse, was dissatisfied with RCMP's efforts and got pilot friend Wayne Curry to fly them to the camp after they had departed. They found his tent had been knocked down, either by wind or animals, but all the equipment was there. They searched the area around the tent and found his backpack, bear spray, a knife, and a VHF radio. Williams and Curry got increasingly concerned, as they didn't buy the story that Schleyer had hiked out when he had left such key equipment behind. On the second day of their search, they found his boat near the inflatable boat, about 60 yards back in the woods from the boat on flat ground next to a thicket of black spruce and willow. The bow and arrows and a handmade buckskin quiver were leaned up against a tree next to a dry bag full of gear on which he'd probably been sitting on. Curtis, an experienced moose hunter, said it looked like the sort of place an archer might set up if trying to call a moose into range. A little further on, they found a camouflage mask with blood and hair on it, and at this point, they called the RCMP back to the area. On October 3rd, the Mounties, Yukon conservation officers, and civilian volunteers flew back to the area to begin more detailed grid search. At first, they found little but bear and wolf tracks, but then a baseball cap was spotted by the searchers, and then camouflage pants, a camera, parts of a skull, and just a few small bones. And all these items were 60 meters or so from the bow in the spruce tree. The teeth in the skull enabled the identification of the remains as being Schleyer. There wasn't much more of his body found. Since there was quite a bit of grisly excrement in the area, it fueled the speculation that Schleyer had been unexpectedly killed and eaten by a bear, as what happened with the famous Timothy Treadwell, whose death was captured in a documentary by Werner Herzog in 2006 called Grizzly Man, based on left behind video footage. And amongst some of the samples taken, the bear scat had bone fragments but no fabric. In Treadwell's case, not only human remains were found in the bear's stomach contents, but also large amounts of his clothing. Most of Schleyer's clothes were never found. But searchers were skeptical it was a bear attack. First, there was no sign of a death struggle. No vegetation or ground was disturbed. The remains were found in a little patch of sparse spruce lying on the moss, and if a bear killed him here, this would be highly unusual, as they usually bury their kills in a cache. The remains of Treadwell and his girlfriend were found in such a cache after they were killed, but there was no cache anywhere in the area for Schleyer. Even if he started off playing dead, a recommended tactic for surviving a grizzly bear attack, friends said he would have known that if an animal continued the attack, the only chance for survival would be to fight back. And generally speaking, a bear attack is prolonged and violent. A friend said, "I think the least likely scenario is some sort of surprise encounter, but it's hard for me to imagine having a bear sneak up on him." And almost everyone who knew Schleyer believed he was simply too good a woodsman, too alert while in the forest, to have a bear catch him by surprise like that. Not to mention, his hat was completely untouched, and if one bear had, it's even harder to imagine the animal killing him without leaving signs of a struggle on a site covered with soft, easily disturbed moss. Bear attacks go on for a long time. The audio tape of Treadwell's death goes on for a very prolonged time, recording the sounds of him being eaten alive. The balaclava contained little blood and hair, and his pants even less. And if a bear attacks a man, it won't remove his pants without them being shredded and soaked in blood. Normally, bears grab the end, especially when attacking from behind, causing profuse bleeding. So why wasn't his balaclava soaked in blood? The plastic container that held his food had not been disturbed. Bear experts say that if a grizzly had killed Schleyer, it is likely the same bear would have gone to the camp given the proximity and even eat through the canned food. Everything points to the evidence being scavenging related and not caused by a violent direct attack. Many agree that the circumstances of his disappearance are very strange, even if they disagree with the cause. Bridget Parker, a spokeswoman for the Mounties and Whitehorse, said the case remains open, but the organization leans towards the idea that Schleyer was attacked and killed by a bear. "There's no foul play suspected," she said. "Everything at the scene suggested a bear attack and did not suggest foul play." Even for an experienced woodsman, some believed that a predatory bear could sneak up on him and deliver a fatal bite. But the Vancouver pathologist who examined Schleyer's remains found no tooth punctures in his skull, nor indications of scratch marks from teeth. When bears attack people, they almost always go for the head. My fiancé and I were on our second night of our 2-night camping trip at a popular campground about a half hour from where we live. For reference, my fiancé is black. We live in a predominantly white, conservative, and racist area. This is important for later. On our first night, we kept hearing noises in the woods around us. The campsite right beside ours to the right was occupied, but the one on the left was not. The campsites are about 150 yards apart, and we had camped here in the exact same plot the year before. Needless to say, we were familiar with the area and the various kinds of animals that live in the woods. The first night, we heard shuffling around our tent. It was obviously something large moving around. We brushed it off and assumed it was just a deer. Now, back to the main event. On August the 11th, we spent the day at the battlefield a town over with my family. They had all been invited to join us for the day by my fiancé as a surprise for me while he proposed to me. We stayed with my family into the evening, about 6 p.m., before heading back to our campsite. When we got back, things were really odd. Our blankets were thrown around, clothes were on the floor, and my backpack had been rearranged and I was missing underwear. But hey, we were stupid 19-year-olds and decided that since whoever had busted in had left and hadn't taken anything important, it was fine and they wouldn't come back. So we set up a campfire and sat out until it was dark, roasting hot dogs and s'mores and smoking cigarettes and celebrating our engagement. Around 9:30 p.m., we put out our fire and decided to go into our tent for the night to celebrate a little more. Nothing too loud or obnoxious. Immediately after we finished, we started to hear the noises outside of our tent again, but this time we focused in. We heard clear footsteps, and at one point, a man whispering. We looked at each other and our eyes got wide. Someone was definitely walking around outside our tent. We were still and completely silent, just listening to the footsteps, and we heard whispering again. Shit. Make that 2 men walking around our tent. As if we had the ability to read minds, my fiancé said, "I have to go to the bathroom." And I agreed. The bathroom was up the hill from our site. Most people who were in the lower sites like ours drove their cars up to the bathroom. Now here's the part that I still get chills thinking about. We got up and were getting dressed. My fiancé had just turned on the light in our tent and put his binder on when a man spoke directly to us from the right outside of the tent. "What are you doing?" I can't even describe how malicious and menacing this voice sounded. It was clearly directed at us, and he said it with a snicker. He was watching us through the walls of the tent. Again, we were stupid 19-year-olds. We had decided to just make a run for it to the car. My fiancé grabbed his pocket knife and his keys and stepped out of the tent. He pulled me with him, and we ran like hell to the car. I heard the footsteps running behind us and then turning and running up to another campsite. At the bathroom, we talked over our options. We talked about sleeping in the car or driving into the town. Then we had another idea. We drove back down to our campsite and began packing everything into the car. At this point, it was around midnight. We moved faster than I think either of us thought possible, wrapping up the tent with our belongings still in it and grabbing our folding chairs. We were all packed in 5 minutes and hopped into the car to leave. I jumped out at the end of the drive and grabbed our nameplate, which had my full name on it, off of the post. As we pulled out of the campsite, I saw our assailants for the first time. Stalking through the woods onto our campsite were 2 tall white men. I realized that these were just the same men who had been driving past our campsite the whole time we were there, just glaring at us and muttering to each other. One was wearing camo hunting gear and the other one was wearing Confederate flag tank top. Both were carrying large hunting knives, unsheathed and at the ready. They turned when they saw our car driving away, and one of them started to make chase, until the other one stopped him. I made eye contact with the man in camo, and he smiled the most terrifyingly evil smile at me, and shook his head slowly. We drove the long way home, taking all the weirdest, hardest to follow roads, and called my dad so he would know we were coming. When we got home, we told my dad everything, and he just shrugged it off as us being paranoid. So I've never told anyone else besides all of you now. And I'm convinced to this day that this was a racially motivated attack. The campground was not heavily populated, and my fiancé was the only non-white person at any of the campsites. There was no mistake that those 2 men were shadowing us since our arrival. They wore Confederate flags and had one on their truck. It was without a doubt those two men were going to attack us for being an interracial couple. I still get cold chills when I think about how close we were to being killed or seriously hurt that night, and just how lucky we were that our reckless plan to just make a run for it worked. So to those two men who stalked our campsite with the hunting knives, let's not meet.
A few months ago I woke up in the morning, but kept lying in bed awake, with my eyes closed for a bit more. While I was lying, again, I confirm, awake, I felt a weight pressing behind me, on the bed, like someone softly sat down right behind me. I turned cheerfully, immediately thinking it's my cat. And nope, there was nothing. Then I was weirded out. After this I went back to sleep and had a really freaky nightmare, where something was hugging me from behind, really tightly. At first in the dream I think it's my mother. Not that she does this, ever. Then I see my mother walking around in the hall, and my heart skips. I didn't see who or what it was, but it was like a small child. Creature wrapped me with arms and legs too. It was turned into a sleep paralysis, where I watched my mother walk around outside my room. Then I managed to wait it off. Anyway, the dream isn't important. I digress. I wrote that off as a dream, or something. But about a week ago this happened again. I was lying in my bed awake. As I woke up before my alarm, I felt something at the foot of my bed, like my cat hopped on or something. I called for my cat as I immediately got up, like a cheerful crazy person, talking to invisible cats. And there is nothing. My cats actually never come into my bed in the mornings. They're always sleeping somewhere else, in the living room at this hour. So that's it. Something is visiting me in the mornings. A few years ago I had some other strange experiences, but they were so subtle, I didn't really share them with anyone. There were a few times where I was sitting at my desk laptoping away. I heard someone breathing, quite loudly and clear. Again I thought it was my cat and turned around without worrying. And he wasn't in my room. The breathing continued. I remember getting up and searching my room. It wasn't coming from my laptop either. I'm all for science and facts. It's fun to try to figure out a logical reason behind a mystery. It's also fun to consider the supernatural options. Please do tell me if this is a natural thing that happens when we lie down. Perhaps it's a standard thing people dream, feel, and happens all the time. And if you believe it's paranormal, do share your thoughts or similar experiences. Since nothing Hollywood dramatic evil happened, even if it really is something paranormal, I feel like it's benevolent. There's been a lot of deaths in my close family, and maybe they sort of drop by. There's a quote from A Storm of Swords that I really love. Oyburn says, "Once, at a citadel, I came into an empty room and saw an empty chair, yet I knew a woman had been there. Only a moment before, the cushion was dented. Where she'd sat, the cloth was still warm, and her scent lingered in the air. If we leave our smells behind us, when we leave a room, surely something of our souls must remain when we leave this life." Growing up, every summer in July to August, my family would get together and camp out for 2 weeks at a White Lake State Park in Tamworth, New Hampshire. Some of my best childhood memories were made there. Rollerblading, Nerf gun wars, flashlight tag, a water balloon fight with my cousins and neighboring kids in the campground. When I was around my late teen years, my family stopped gathering together to camp out after my grandmother passed away. One of the last years I was there, this one particular memory was stuck with me. A little over 10 years ago, I was 16 years old. It was around 10 p.m. at night when I noticed I had a missed call on my cheap little trace phone. My family was sitting around the campfire cooking some more and sharing some laughs. So I decided to go off for some privacy to return a call. I took a long, narrow trail that winds in between other campsites, that at the end leads to a bathroom. I wasn't going to the bathroom. I just wanted to find an empty campsite and sit at a picnic table to make my call. There was plenty of those, since this whole side of the campground where I was heading was vacant. There were no other campers nearby in that area. It was quiet and dark, so I chose a campsite. I sat down at the table. Lights from the distant bathroom from up on top of the hill behind me were illuminating my surroundings just a little bit. I called my friend and was carrying on a conversation around 20 minutes. As I'm sitting there, staring straight ahead, I see a silhouette coming down the road in front of me. The figure is coming towards my direction, where all these empty campsites are. I could see it was a person. It's not that usual to see people strolling through the campground for a night walk. The people I see usually have flashlights, though this person did not. I wasn't creeped out at this point. No reason to be. I was just watching curiously. As the person got closer, I could see a better outline that it was a man I was looking at. I also noticed he slowed down his pace. I kept my eyes fixated on him as I continued conversating on my cell phone. A minute or two passes, and now he stopped moving. He's just standing there, in the road looking straight into the campsite where I'm at. I don't know if he knew I could see him. He was staring at me, and I was staring right back at him. He was a little heavy set and tall. I could also make out he was wearing a light jacket. I couldn't see much from facial features, but I would guess I was staring at a man in his 30s or 40s. Alarm bells were going off in my head now. My mind had turned into mush at this point. I'm frozen. I was no longer listening to what my friend was saying on the phone. I was in a stare-off with this guy. Then, he started to move again. He was tiptoeing towards me, very carefully, like he didn't want me to make noise. He put one foot in front of the other. He leaned forward in a slight hunch form. It looked like he was about to charge towards me. In that moment, I snapped out of that mind-mushy frozen state and leaped off the picnic table and started running through the campsite, back towards the trail. Thud, thud, thud. I could hear him trampling behind me, lead scuffing, heavy yet fast footsteps. Footsteps were getting louder and closer. I made it back to that narrow trail. Once he got close to whereabout I was, I heard the sound of twigs snapping and an oof noise that came from the man, which I can imagine maybe he tripped or almost tripped, or maybe got face-slapped by a tree branch. Most likely he was familiar with the trail like I was. Whatever the reason was, it caused him to stop chasing me. I didn't stop to look back. I just kept running and running until I made it back to my family's campsite. When I got back, they were still sharing laughs and smiles by the campfire. I broke down crying and I was trembling. I explained what had just happened. My aunt spoke up and said, "Oh geez, he probably thought he knew you and was coming to give you a good scare as a joke." She dismissed me. My cousin chimed in and said, "Yeah, he probably stopped running after he realized that he didn't actually know you. He probably feels dumb now." They all chuckle about it and change the subject. I think I was dismissed because no one wanted the good vibes of the night to be ruined. And the fact I'm just a socially anxious person in general. I'm very cautious and shy for that time being. I let them convince me that I was just overreacting and overthinking. But here I am, years later, looking back and shaking my head over this. I wish I was taken seriously. But other than that, one thing happening. It was still a good trip. It was time well spent with family. My experience makes me think twice about going for a walk by myself, anywhere. I carry pepper spray and a mini keychain alarm on me now. So, Mr. Campground Chaser, let's not meet again.
In July of 2016, I went with 3 of my roommates on a camping trip in New Mexico. We decided to hike into the Pecos Wilderness because of the beautiful pictures of the lake and trails on the preserve. I don't know if camping on the preserve was actually allowed, but we were carefree and didn't check to see if we could. We hiked until we reached one of the lakes. By that time it was dusk and we were starving and tired. We decided to set up our tents about a half a mile away from the lake. We brought our hot dogs and beans to cook on a fire. Classic camping cuisine. We split up and got stuff for the fire. Dead branches, twigs, stones. While getting firewood, I noticed a lot of coyotes scat in the area. I made a mental note to keep my pocket knife close, even though coyotes aren't really a huge threat. When I came back, I told my friends, but they didn't think much of it. We cooked our hot dogs and beans and passed around the bottle of whiskey. Now, this may sound irresponsible, but 1 bottle of whiskey split 4 ways isn't that much. After dinner, we sat talking about the things that went on that year. Overwatch, the election, Brexit, Zika virus, etc. Soon it was pitch black. The only light coming from the fire and a couple of electric lanterns we brought. My roommates went to bed one by one until, like in a normal horror story fashion, I was alone. I sat stroking the fire, making sure it was controlled burn before I could go brush my teeth and change my clothes. I walked half a mile back to the lake with one of the lanterns and used the lake water to brush my teeth and wash my face. While washing my face, the hair on the back of my neck stood up and I got the feeling of being watched. I'm crouching at the edge of the lake, realizing how vulnerable I am, only a pocket knife to defend myself. There could be a deranged camper out here. I stand up, hand in my pocket, on my knife, when I hear the coyotes howling. I relax, thinking it may have just been one of the coyotes watching me, so I walk back to the campsite. I make it back, and I go into my tent to get sleeping clothes out of my backpack. I'm about to take off my shirt and start changing when I hear twigs break. I thought one of my roommates came back out of their tent to go take a leak. I stuck my head out of the tent, and I saw a coyote near the campfire. I freeze, trying to take in what's happening. It looks like a coyote, except for a few characteristics. Its eyes were really bright yellow. It looked taller than a normal coyote would be, and it was crouching near the fire, crouching on its hind legs. I'm frozen, being stared down by the coyote, when one of my roommates tries to get out of his tent. He sticks a foot up and his head out before he sees it. He yells, "What the actual fuck?" The coyote runs at breakneck speed into the darkness, but normally it's on its hind legs. But my roommate continues to yell and wakes up the others. They ask what happened, and we explain to them what we saw. They thought we were bullshitting them and didn't believe a word we said. Me and the roommate decided to sleep in the same tent, since I was the only one who brought a knife along. We laid there, cramped in the tent, too terrified to sleep when we heard noises. Twigs snapping around our campsite, as if it was circling us. We stayed motionless in the tent, not daring to see the time go by on our phones. But eventually daylight came, and the noises grew further away. Our 2 roommates didn't hear the noise and had to force us out of the tent in order to leave. We walked miles back to where we parked our car and decided we should get a hotel room and spend the night in Santa Fe. And when we got to our room, I immediately Googled the events of what happened the previous night, and we learned the Navajo legend. When you go camping, make sure you have something to protect yourself and a way to get out of there in an instant.
years ago, when I was still a teenager, my friend Justin and I would often go longboarding at night. As my friends and I were quite the night owls, we loved the freedom of almost never seeing another soul on the roads or the paths we frequented. And even when using main roads, it would be very rare to see a car out so late in such a rural area. Besides, you could hear and see them coming from very far away due to their headlights and the noise of the vehicle. We were really into it at the time, and would often ride our boards for miles and miles, sometimes not arriving home until the sun was up. One particular night, we decided to ride a few miles away from our usual back roads and take one of our favorite hidden routes. It began with a narrow paved path that was the only piece of land separating two sides of a long lake. It would often sink under due to rain, and we wanted to seize the opportunity to use it before it rained and went underwater again. It was roughly 2 miles long and was very relaxing to ride due to the scenery. After making it to the end of the lake, we decided to continue moving and turn into a very close path that leads directly into a densely wooded wilderness preservation. As we came up to the first hill, we looked down at the bottom into the blackness. We both noticed what appeared to be a tiny moving ball of dim light down there. It moved so strangely, and it was extremely difficult to make out what it was. Rather than shine our flashlight down, we curiously watched it for a few moments, whispering to each other about what it could possibly be. And all at once, that small light turned into multiple blinding lights and extremely loud revving sounds, overwhelming our senses that had been accustomed to the dark and silence. Acting purely on fear, we instantly turned around and ran as fast as we could, hearing yelling and revving gaining behind us. By sheer luck, we managed to run off path into a very dark, overgrown hole on the side of a hill, overlooking where we had just came from. We decided to hide in the natural dugout of this hill, hoping the plants and darkness would be enough to protect us from whatever was happening out there. We watched our pursuers ride up to where we had originally been standing. There were 4 men, 2 on 4-wheelers and 2 on full-size motorcycles. They were yelling at each other about something, but we couldn't make out what they were saying due to the distance we had covered. We felt safe enough to whisper very softly to each other and speculated who these people could be. Our first thought was that they might be some park rangers of some kind, although we had never seen one here in the many times we had been through. Besides, we doubted this county even had the budget or desire to have anyone patrol the deep woods at night. Besides that, these men were on vehicles entirely inappropriate for paved bike trails, and they were very angry about something. They called out to us for a while, yelling things like, "We know you're out there," and "We can see you, come on out." We stayed silent and decided to call their bluff instead of running. Eventually, we clearly heard one of the men yell, "Find them, now," and smashed a bottle. That had erased any hope of the thought that these were just park rangers. We watched them split up, each of them going a different way down the series of paths on their vehicles, including the path we came from. It took us what felt like ages to even move. We were frozen in terror inside that dugout, watching the lights from the vehicles travel through the woods and paths. One of them already coming full circle and passing the point he had started from. I thought about dialing my phone for help, but I was too afraid to open my phone in fear that even the smallest amount of light would give away our location. After waiting for the lights of the vehicles to reach their farthest distance yet, we finally summoned the nerve to get up and try and run somewhere far enough from these people to make a safe call. We ran as fast and hard as we could through the woods. Since their headlights gave away their location on the paths, we could easily hide whenever we felt they were getting too close. Our available hiding spots were getting progressively worse as the woods became less dense, and the fear I felt waiting for one of them to drive past us while basically only being covered in leaves and plants may still be unmatched to this day. Finally, we emerged from the woods onto the intersection of 2 main roads, far from where we had started. We ducked down into the ditch to call for help. When I opened up my phone, I noticed I had a bunch of recent missed calls from one of our other friends, Connor, who we were supposed to meet up with after our longboard excursion. I called him and frantically asked where he was. Luck was with us again. He hadn't given up on our plans despite us ignoring him, and he was only a few miles away, already heading in our direction. I gave him the name of the 2 streets we were on and explained to him that we needed to be picked up right away. He agreed to speed over to us while Justin and I waited in hiding. Thankfully, Connor arrived before any of those men did. We bolted into the back seats of his car, yelling for him to get out of here, and he took off. Relief doesn't even begin to describe what I felt being safely driven home after the experience I just had. After explaining everything that had just happened to Connor, we ended up just moving on with our night and decided not to call the police. We figured that they would be gone by the time any officer made it out there, and we would only be putting ourselves at risk by admitting to breaking the law by taking those paths so late at night. And I still have no idea what happened or who those people were. I've been told all kinds of theories from friends and family that have heard this story. Some think we walked right up to a huge drug deal. Justin and I later admitted to each other that when the revving started and we couldn't see, our minds both went straight to an image of a chainsaw-wielding horror movie serial killer. So I suppose it could have been much, much worse. Frustratingly enough, whatever those 2 men thought we saw that actually made them want to catch us so badly, we never actually saw. I guess we'll never really know what happened there.
When I was about 12 years old, my dad moved into a basement apartment that he rented for about 2 years before moving. For the first few months, everything was normal, with no occurrences that were believed to be out of the ordinary. Before I continue, I would like to state that before the following events happened, I didn't really believe in ghosts. One night, my dad and I decided we would go to bed, so my dad blew out the candle that was sitting on the kitchen table, put the lid on, turned off the lights, and went to sleep. When we woke up the next morning, the candle was lit again, with the lid sitting on the table next to it. That was a fairly mild incident, but it would seem to be the turning point at the beginning of the activity within the house. You would constantly see a shadow figure from the corner of your eye, pacing down a hallway that led towards the bedrooms at the back of the house. But as soon as you would turn to look, it would disappear. Also, in the same hallway, you get the feeling that there would be someone walking directly behind you, as in 6 inches from your back. One night, my dad and his girlfriend had been sitting in the living room, and they started to hear what they later described to be a hissing noise coming from the back bedroom, which seemed to have the most activity. On other occasions, you would hear the sound of someone whistling coming from the same area. My dad's girlfriend and I watched doorknobs turn, doors open, and then slam shut right in front of our eyes as well. I did not find out until much more recently that while I was away from the home, my dad's girlfriend had been laying in bed when the drawers of the nightstand started violently opening and slamming shut directly beside her. One night I was sleeping in my dad's room because I was terrified of being alone in my room, and I suddenly woke up feeling as if someone was controlling my thoughts and emotions. I was so angry and was hysterically crying, and just did not feel that it was me. This feeling only went away when I went outside about 30 minutes after I woke up, feeling like this when my dad took me to sit outside. After that had happened, my dad moved us out because we no longer felt safe anymore. Anyways, these are just a few of the experiences from the time I lived in this house. I'm sure there will be plenty of people who will come up with reasons to justify everything I experienced, but I know what I went through.
I live in a big house by a country road in Pennsylvania. Love the outdoors, and often I go hiking out and fishing or ride my ATV whenever I get a day off from work. And there's a massive forest behind my house, and I've had countless adventures in those woods. Sometimes during the night, animals visit my backyard. I don't mind, they don't never cause any trouble, but I got a security camera that monitors the backyard just in case. Most of the time, it's just deer, foxes, and one time a black bear. There ain't a lot of houses in my area, so animals are essentially my neighbors. Last year, I invited my friends and family to my place for a barbecue cookout during the 4th of July. The adults and I were on the deck telling silly stories of things that happened at work. Their children were either out playing in the backyard shooting Nerf guns at each other or inside playing games. And after the party ended, I cleaned up around the house. Around 10 p.m., I was in the living room watching the news and started to hear loud shrieks coming from the woods. I turned on the lights in the backyard and looked through the kitchen window, but saw nothing. I didn't think much of it, just assumed it was just some cougar. I've seen them a few times throughout the summer while hiking in the forest late at night, so I just turned off the lights and went back to bed. Next morning, I decided to check the security camera to see if any animals came by my backyard, but nothing happened that night. I was off from work that day, so I took my ATV and ventured in the woods. About 10 minutes of driving through the forest, I came across the remains of a buck deer covered in claw marks laying in the dirt. His eyes and tongue were ripped out, and after looking a little closer, there was a massive slit under the belly, and all of its organs were removed. I just brushed it off though, and just continued to ride my ATV through the forest. After about 20 minutes gone by, I got thirsty and stopped by a small rocky cliff near the creek. I drank my water while sitting on the cliff. It was pretty relaxing hearing the calm stream of water and the birds chirping in the trees. I saw a red-tailed hawk swoop down in the water and grab a large fish. It was incredible, and things like that is why I love going in the woods. Just when I was about to go back to the ATV and drive home, I noticed the corpse of a young man was lying on the bottom of the cliff, and blood was smeared all over the rocks around the body. I walked down a nearby hill to get a closer look, and much like the buck I saw earlier, the corpse was covered in claw marks, and the tongue, eyes, and organs were all ripped out. That was pretty unsettling to see, so I just took some pictures and showed them to the police when I got home. The police recovered the human corpse for further investigation and told me to contact them if I ever found anything else suspicious in the forest. After they left, I went to a diner for lunch with my best friend George. And I told George, something strange been going on in the woods, and I said, I came across the husk of a deer and later a young man. Both of them had all their organs, eyes, and tongues extracted by some. And after hearing that, George had a curious look on his face. And I recently got a job with the local police, and there have been numerous reports of cattle and even human corpses with the same conditions for the past week, said George. What George was telling me was making me real uneasy. Some of the farmers think it might be aliens abducting people and animals, but that's just ridiculous, George said as he asked for a refill on his coffee. And then he noticed the nervous look on my face. What's wrong? You think aliens are doing this? George laughed. Nah, that ain't possible. There ain't no way that's possible. I'm probably just still in shock from what happened in the woods earlier, Nuss said. George just nodded his head. Nah, I'd be spooked too, if I was in your shoes at least. Well, at least you didn't go Logan Paul recording the dead body, just making a joke out of it, said George. His joke made me chuckle a little. After lunch, I just headed home. And as much as I love the outdoors, I didn't feel safe going in the woods anymore, so I locked all my doors and windows and played on my PS4 for the rest of the afternoon. When it got dark outside, I started hearing the same screaming that I heard last night. And I went and turned on the lights in the backyard, and for a split second I saw a pair of big eyes in the woods, reflecting the lights, before rushing back deep into the shrubbery. And I kept hearing the screaming throughout the night, so I went to bed with headphones on and listened to relaxing music. And just in case, I had a pocket pistol under my pillow for when something unwanted entered my room. Luckily, I was able to sleep well for the night. When I had breakfast the next morning, and I checked the security camera, nothing came by my backyard until 3:17 a.m. And I couldn't believe my eyes. Saw some hairy humanoid thing with like 6 long limbs crawling in my backyard, and had dark shaggy hair hanging from him like an orangutan. And there was an arm directly on top of each shoulder, and it had these big glowing eyes with no pupils, massive claws on each hand, and its mouth was gaping open with some long, sharp teeth. And it was dragging a massive bear covered in claw marks. The creature then began to eat the bear, but rather than just devouring it, the beast cut open the belly and ate the organs inside. It also ate the eyes and the tongue. When the creature was finished eating, it came back to the door and scratched on it like a dog trying to get inside. It snarled and slowly crawled its way back to the woods, only leaving behind the bear's skin and bones. And of all the years I spent in the woods, I ain't never seen anything like that. I went to my backyard, and sure enough, the empty husk of a bear was lying in the grass. I checked my door, and luckily there ain't no damage, but I went ahead and called the police immediately. George came with me, I showed them bear husk and security footage.
Oh my god, what is that? This is horrifying, man. Whatever that thing is, it's probably the one who killed all those people and animals.
George cried. Thankfully, I wasn't the only one freaked out by that video footage. George and the other officer decided to contact the state police. Shortly after, a squadron came and they searched the forest. And after several hours, they didn't find nothing, so they left the area. When I came home from work that night, I began to hear the same screaming sounds coming from the woods. I was outside and I heard the sound much clearer. It sounded like a dog or a hyena, but much deeper. And I couldn't just let this creature kill people and their livestock. I wanted to end this once and for all. And I grabbed my hunting shotgun, pocket pistol, cell phone, and flashlight, and then I headed off in the woods. And as I journeyed into the forest, screams echoed all over the place. The creature could be heard anywhere. Suddenly, I saw it several yards away from me, into the insides of an elk. Carefully aimed my gun at the monster, then noticed me as well. I pulled the trigger and shot it. The beast fell over, but quickly got up, brushing out the bullets in its chest. The bullets didn't even penetrate the skin. That creature gave out a loud, enraged roar, and it started charging on me on all 6 limbs. And I shot it 4 more times, but it only knocked it off its balance. My gun suddenly got jammed, and the creature jumped towards me. And I swung my shotgun at its head like a baseball bat. I heard its neck snap, and the creature cried in pain. It fell to the ground, and its top pair of arms snapped its head back in place. And the creature snarled at me and ran deeper into the woods. I tried shooting it with my pocket pistol, but the creature got away. And exhausted, I walked back to my house. And I checked my phone and said it was 11 p.m. So I locked everything in my house and went to bed. And I was woken up to the noise of loud banging at my door at 4 in the morning. I put on a pair of night vision goggles and looked through the window. I was startled when I saw, not 1, but 3 of those ape creatures standing under my deck. One of them was able to smash the door open, and they started to crawl in my house one by one. Terrified, I tried calling 911, but my phone died, and I could hear the beast walking through the house. And the monster started to look around the place, interacting with the objects around them, and I heard them knocking over my coffee maker and my refrigerator opening. One of them even began eating the food inside. Then I noticed that one of the monsters was standing underneath the chandelier, right next to the front door. I shot the chain holding the chandelier and it fell on top of the beast. And then I rushed down the stairs into the front door, and the other 2 creatures started to chase me. One of them ran over the broken glass and started crying in pain. The last one tried crawling over the wall around the glass like an insect. And I quickly put on some shoes and ran for my car. And just when I was about to start the engine, the ape creature slammed into my car, nearly pushing it over. And I started the engine and drove away from my house as fast as possible. I headed to a hotel near a highway and asked for a room on the top floor, and I spent the rest of the night there sleeping. Luckily, I was able to charge up my phone in the hotel room. Called off work the next morning telling them I was sick, and then I called police. Except for the back door and my chandelier, not much was damaged in my house. When the police investigated my house, all the creatures were gone. However, the police were able to find some clumps of black hair around the house, as well as some blood around the broken glass. And the samples of blood and hair they collected at the crime scene has only added more mystery of what happened. At first, it didn't seem like anything unusual, but one of the scientists in the crime lab discovered that the chemical makeup wasn't purely organic, and that it seemed unexpectedly mechanical, basically an organic machine. And the samples were then sent to a hospital lab for further research. And I began repairing the house. I installed a much stronger back door this time. Also adopted a young German Shepherd from the animal shelter. I take her with me whenever I go in the woods and stayed out of there whenever it was dark outside. And I ain't even see the creatures since then, but every once in a while I hear them screaming in the woods. And occasionally there are still reports in the local newspaper of animal and human husks being found in my area. And every time I'm reminded of those things, I keep asking myself, what are they? But more importantly, how many more are there out there?
Today is the anniversary of me destroying my lower back I'm not paralyzed or anything, but I've had 2 herniated lumbar discs and terrible compressed sciatic nerve. I know that today isn't a big deal to have surgery and fix bulging discs, but due to an unfortunate family history with a local invasive medical practice, I'm not entirely trusting of doctors, especially not ones that could end up paralyzing me from the waist below. Usually one wouldn't bother remembering the exact date of an accident that didn't cripple them after a few months, but I remember. I feel like I have to remember that day. I injured myself taking a nasty fall traveling in the Judean mountains, close to Cormoran, where dead sea squirrels were found. One moment I was standing on the hilltop, and the next I found myself tumbling down into the cavern. The fall didn't feel serious. I say I had felt serious because I landed on my backpack, and the impact mostly sent waves of adrenaline through my body, but I obviously know better. I fell about 10 feet down. The surrounding space was spinning for a few moments, and I could hear my pounding heart in my ears. I looked around frantically. I didn't feel any pain at that moment, so my biggest concern was being trapped in a cave without any way out. I was just beginning to panic, and I noticed a stream of light coming into the subterranean cavity I landed into. I collected myself and got back up on my feet. Walking around the cavern for a bit, I made sure that the source of light was indeed an exit, which it was. Feeling adventurous for a lone traveler who could have died mere minutes ago, I opted to go look around the cave for a bit. I guess the adrenaline rush hadn't worn off by that point yet. Anyway, I pulled out my flashlight and started walking into the depths of the cave. For about half an hour, I couldn't find anything other than an endless maze of cave formations sprawling seamlessly into infinity. The various spiky mineral deposits forming from the floor and the roof of the cave gave it an appearance of some ominous colossal alien's maw. It was almost mesmerizing to look at. Endless stony tendrils sticking out in all directions for what seemed to be miles upon miles. I heard someone call out from the depth of the cave just as I was about to make my way out. A man's voice boomed from the deeper parts of the cave, and it almost sounded worried. "Who's there?" The sudden vocalization made me shudder in surprise as I turned around calling back, "Hey, anybody there?" "Hey," the voice trailed off. I thought someone was deeper in the cave. In my mind, it could have been someone who got lost or a patrolling ranger. "Help me!" the voice called out again, seemingly closer. My heart raced, and I was sure it was someone who needed help. I took a breath and started pacing hastily toward the source of the sound. As I walked, I called out, "Hey, are you all right? Do you need help?" "Who are you?" the voice called again, seemingly closer to me. I was cut off. "Stop right there! Who is that?" the voice called out. Something about it sounded odd. My instincts were practically screaming at me to take my feet, turn around, and run toward it as fast as I could. Instead of listening to my gut, I just stood still and started explaining who I was and what I was doing in the subterranean cavity. No response came. Thinking whoever it might be was possibly too hurt to keep on responding, I just decided to run towards the location from which I felt the sound had come. "What are you?" That question screeched at me from a close distance, and my heart sunk as I was beginning to realize that I was in the wrong kind of bad situation. I sheepishly called out, "Hello?" as I carefully shined around myself with my flashlight. "I just want to help you." I had called out again before I heard the sound of animal claws scraping against the rocks. It came from above. I didn't want to look up. I knew I should just run. I knew I should have just blasted my way out of there and never looked back. But I didn't, because I felt something dripping on my head. "Help me." Something snored close to my ears, and that's when I woke up. As the light hit the cave ceiling, I nearly shit my pants. Not to mention that I cursed under my breath like a sailor. Above me, clinging to the ceiling like some sort of lizard, was some sort of emancipated, sickly yellow thing. It looks human-like, but it was so skinny and freakishly long. I stood there frozen with fear, slowly building up in every fiber of my being. That thing, it seemed like me, revealing its rancid, serrated yellow rows of teeth. Time seemed to slow down at that moment, the same moment that I had noticed that thing had no eyes at all. There was just a terrible, stretched, sickly skin over most of its head. Without even consciously deciding to run, I felt my legs move on their own. I had managed to move a few meters away from that thing before it jumped in the air, awkwardly, disgustingly twisting its body in the air and landing on its four limbs. It stared straight at me, despite having no eyes, managing to grab a hold of my backpack. That thing tore it straight from my shoulders. I felt a tug, and then a lot of weight was taken off my back. I just ran. Assuming this thing was too occupied with my backpack, I ran as fast as I could. Moments later, I heard the noise of scraping claws on the rocky surface again, followed by more calls of help. They were getting louder and louder, which each passing moment I ran and I ran without looking back, and the cave seemed to go on forever. Eventually, I could feel the penetrating light of the sun. The exit was in sight. I was about to escape from the cave. I heard the creature call out to me, "Hear Israel." My heart sank. It uttered the opening words of the prayer. I was inches away from the exit of the cave, and a surge of sharp pain just shot through my back. It was so bad I froze, and the monster slammed me into the ground. It barked at me, scraping its bony forelimbs at my body. The weight of this thing sent further waves of agony along my lower back and leg. The pain was unbearable, but I knew I had to keep from trying to escape from this predator. I twisted and turned my body underneath that thing, and it bit my shoulder. I felt pressure on my shoulder and some liquid running down my arm. My heart pounded really loudly, and something in me snapped. I started banging my fist on that thing. I didn't know what I hit. I couldn't tell. All I could feel was its leathery skin. It let go of me for a moment. I turned to my back, forcing myself to kick that thing that was now looming over me, and I probably pissed it off as hard as I could. It barely went backwards. Instead, I just screeched. I didn't know how I survived. Whatever that thing was, its neck was completely twisted on itself, and it looked like it had been snapped backward, and even further making the neck muscles on that creature appear as if they were stretched 360 degrees. I kept on kicking at the abomination while slowly crawling toward the exit. I have no idea what I did. I just wanted to create some space between it and me. I felt something stab at my hip, sending another gut-wrenching wave of neuro signals down my leg. I turned to my side as I did, and I felt my head land on a rock. Instinctively, I tossed it at the monster and resorted to pouncing at me, but I managed to roll out of its way, and it landed in the light. It screeched and howled before bouncing on one of the cave walls and scurrying away into the darkness while I let out some curse words. A mixture of fear and confusion took over my senses as chills ran down my entire body once I heard that thing mimic my speech, almost even mimicking my voice. My heart was about to burst out of the moment. I forced myself to limp out of the cavern, and I was lucky enough to encounter a couple of patrolling rangers. I told them I had fallen and gotten hurt as a result. At the moment, I didn't think telling anyone about the creature was a good idea. Legend states that King Solomon banished all the demons and evil spirits out of the land of Israel. Knowing what I know now, I can wholeheartedly say Solomon was not very good at banishing demons.
This was 3 years ago. I started college down the country. I was 18, on Tinder. Never actually met anyone off it, but I would just swipe through guys just to be nosy and see who was on it. I was swiping right on some, and about an hour after, I got a message off this guy, who according to his account was about 20 kilometers away. We made some small talk. It was awkward, and I stopped replying. A day later, I got a friend request off him on Facebook. Mind you, I have a common enough name so it would have took him ages for him to have found me. We have no mutual friends, and my Tinder photos is not on my Facebook page. The only thing I had on it was the university I was attending, so maybe that's how he found me, but I don't know. I messaged him asking how he found out my full name, and he just replied with, "I think we have a connection. I really want to get to know you better." I unmatched him and deleted my Tinder and blocked the accounts he tried to add me in on all social media. After that, it was quiet for a few months. I was staying in digs and was knuckling down as I had lots of assignments from the get-go. This was towards the end of November. I had no assignments due for 2 weeks, so I decided to go out with some friends. One of my friends stayed in student accommodation, and the other was commuting, so she stayed in with the other friend. I decided to walk back to my digs, as my landlady would probably freak out if I wasn't home. That morning I really wish I got a taxi instead. My walk back was about 15 minutes from the local nightclub we were at. It was about 3 a.m. at this point. I was at the front door of the house opening up. The door was annoying as it had 2 different locks, and I had to pull the handle towards myself to head. It's also tough when you're tipsy and trying not to wake up the family you're staying with. Anyway, the car comes towards me, so I quickly get inside and lock the door. The car pulls into the driveway of the house I am staying in, and just sits there with the full headlights on. I am there shaking and too afraid to move from the crouch. I am there shaking and too afraid to move from crouched below the door, as there is frosted glass about halfway up. As I get the courage to go upstairs to look out my bedroom window to see who it is, the car pulls out of the driveway and speeds away. A few days later, I get a new friend request off a creepy Tinder guy on a new Facebook profile. As there was no photo on this account, just the same name, blocked. It was enough that it caused me to transfer the universities the following year. Thankfully, I haven't heard anything since. I don't know if it was just bad timing, or if it was that creep on Tinder that sat in the driveway, but it was petrifying. If you take anything from this, be careful who you let in your social media or dating apps, and what information you have up.
My husband and I were at the supermarket, and our baby was being especially fussy, so we took her for a quick drive, the motion of which usually calms her down. It only took about 10 minutes to settle her, and I was still in the store, but was unsure how much longer I'd be, and there's poor cell reception inside. So he pulled back into the parking lot to wait for me. It was an unseasonably nice day, so he took her in her car seat to sit on one of the benches outside the store. He took a business call, and I just sat them down, absent-mindedly rocking the carrier, when a woman, well-dressed, mid-30s, average height, fit build, approached them. It's not uncommon for people to ask to play with our baby. She's got big rosy cheeks, soft wisp of gold hair, and the most adorable gurgly toothless grin, especially when she's deep in a good nap. But her nap schedule is paramount, so my husband was preparing to tell the woman she actually couldn't play with our baby right then. She walked over right in their direction, brimming with nonchalant confidence, and before he could even finish his sentence explaining she was napping and not to be touched, she picked up the carrier and started walking off. He was in shock for a minute, not fully believing someone would be ballsy enough to do something so sinister in plain daylight. So he said, "Excuse me, put her down!" as his panic mounted. She remained calm this entire time, but when he called after her, she started walking away more briskly than when she'd approached. He ran full speed ahead, tried to grapple the carrier out of her hands, finally resulting to restraining her arms. This woman yells, "Help! He's trying to take my baby! Kidnapping! 911, help!" kicking him in the shin and pulling a pink bottle of pepper spray out of her handbag. Of course, no one in the parking lot was clocking the earlier interaction and assumed he really was a kidnapper. A lone man in a Deadpool t-shirt versus a tiny, well-dressed woman. Immediately, a man knocked my husband to the ground and was holding him down. He could hear bystanders encouraging the woman to file a police report, but she was doing a very convincing job of acting shaken up and insisted she just wanted to get home. To make matters worse for my husband, she was driving a minivan. He was in a raw state of panic, realizing the entire parking lot had banded together to inadvertently facilitate the kidnapping of our daughter. He was begging and pleading with them, but no one was listening. They just kept screaming at him that the jig was up and he needed to lie still and wait for the police and stop terrorizing a young mother. My husband finally had the novel idea to show the family pictures on his phone, but too panicked to think clearly, this mess fitted him shouting, "I have pictures of our baby on my phone!" Which, of course, everyone interpreted as him having either stalking photos or worse, pornographic images of the baby. It was at this point that a man, I can't entirely blame the man considering what he thought was going on, kicked my husband hard as he could in the ribs. It was at this moment I was coming out of the store, and I thought he was being robbed by these people. I was yelling for security, so panicked my chest constricted, and I could barely get any sound out. It was only then I realized he did not have our baby with him. When I saw she was being held by a woman, I was relieved. I thought maybe the woman had intervened to move my daughter out of harm's way while my husband was being robbed and was walking away to get help. I couldn't find a security guard outside the store, so I ran to the people holding my husband down, waving my wallet, pleading, "Take everything you want, just let up and leave us alone." And one of the men holding him down said something like, "Lady, we need to wait for the police to deal with him." And I was so confused. Why would the muggers have called the police? I just kept stammering. "What do you mean? What are you talking about?" And made out someone saying,
"He tried to abduct that woman's kid."
I did not understand and was sure I misheard him. My husband would never hurt a child, and we have 4 kids. If he was going to commit a crime, bringing home another kid would be the bottom of his list. I was trying to understand what the man was saying, and suddenly it all clicked. I looked around for the woman who had the baby carrier, and she was halfway across the parking lot. I went into total ballistic trigger cub mode. Literally leapt out of my heels and sprinted across the parking lot. I'm not a UFC fighter. I've never even taken a self-defense class, so all I could think to do was grab the woman by her hair and squeeze her throat with my other hand, which didn't do much. She was getting away even as I grappled with her. Amazingly, none of the other bystanders had yet connected that my husband was telling the truth, and this woman was absconding with my baby. I yanked on her hair as hard as I could, and that was enough to make her drop the carrier. I was so scared and surprised that I actually just threw myself on top of the carrier, covering the entire thing like a blanket, and stayed that way without saying or doing anything else. The woman left. Not one person tried to stop her, even though she was clearly leaving without the child she claimed was hers, which would be pretty damn incriminating if I had to watch this scene unfold. Within the next couple of minutes, police had arrived. After all of that, there was still several bystanders who explained it was my husband trying to kidnap the baby. The police, to my horror, assumed that she must not have had bad intentions. The first questions they asked me after getting her description weren't investigative. They were questions thinly veiled, trying to convince me not to pursue charges, still placing blame on my husband. A small sampling,
"Do your husband and the baby look dissimilar? Is there a chance she thought he was abducting the baby and she was trying to intervene? Could your husband have been doing something inappropriate or violent to the baby that would make her feel compelled to extricate the baby from the situation? Did she seem groggy or confused? Could she have mistaken either of them for her own family members?"
They spent more time verifying that the baby was actually mine than they concerned themselves with the fact that the baby was not actually hers. My husband called his brother at that point, who works in the office with a lot of lawyers, and connected with one ASAP who got us the priceless advice to get every officer's name and badge number, to request copies of the store's security tapes right away, and to escalate our complaint higher up the chain if the officers weren't taking us seriously. Finally, we had reason to believe we were being taken seriously, and we went home, and both just shook and cried until we had to get our other kids from school. My husband is seething with rage and grappling with a feeling of helplessness from how little he was able to do, and has 2 cracked ribs from when the man kicked him. To the officer's credit, they did ask if he'd like to press charges, but considering the man was genuinely convinced at the time that he was on the right side of intervening in a kidnapping and stayed to talk to the police and apologized profusely when the truth became clear, he declined to press charges. Amazingly and frustratingly, there were still people who stuck around to talk to the police who were giving my husband dirty looks, and one man who even implored the police to involve CPS to verify it was really our baby. Parking lot kidnapper and parking lot skeptics. We better never meet again.
When I was 15, I thought it'd be cool and messed around with witchcraft. 'Cause, all my friends were doing it. And ended up with some pretty dark stuff involving desecration of a religious item. At first, I thought it was just hadn't worked, went about my life. Little did I know, I set off a chain of events that led to the worst year of my life. At first, things started small. Started seeing shadow people and I had trouble sleeping. Over a few months, it got worse. I was barely sleeping, seeing shadow people every night, getting my blankets pulled off, hear people talking in my room, having my legs pulled as I slept. It was bad. Think paranormal activity type bad. I tried to handle it on my own at first. Could only sleep if I had music blaring and a t-shirt covering my eyes, because the activity was so bad. The presence in my room got so bad that no one in my family would go in my room anymore. The room felt like a black hole of oppression. Started getting more violent and aggressive with people around me until my parents took me to our pastor. He told me that I was possessed and would need to do some stuff to get rid of the attachment. It wasn't all exorcist and shit, but it was intense and grueling. When I first started trying to get rid of the presence, the activity intensified so much, the whole house was affected. My brother started having nightmares. One of them started sleepwalking, and I was still having the worst of it. One night towards the end, I was woken up by my whole bed shaking violently. At this point, I was so tired I didn't even want to fight anymore. I just laid in the bed as it shook and waited for it to be over. I was then grabbed by both feet and literally dragged out of my bed. When I got up off the floor and tried to get back into bed, I was shoved back down and heard the most terrifying growling. I just laid on the floor for what must have been hours, eventually going into the living room to sleep on the couch. After the activity slowed down greatly, it would just be something every once in a while. Cut a few years down the road, I was 23, had been living on my own for a while, and had to move back to my parents' house. It was empty at the time. As my parents had moved, they let me stay there, rent-free, with my roommate, as they still owned it. My roommate took my old room, and I took the master's bedroom. 2 days after we moved in, my roommate begged me to sleep in the living room with her, because the level of activity in that room scared her, and she didn't want to sleep alone anymore. It was more of the same stuff: shadow people, odd noises, shaking beds, getting pulled on, etc. The last straw for both of us was when we were both sitting in the living room and heard the radio in the bedroom at the end of the hallway turn on. No one slept in this room. It just had some of my brother's stuff in it as storage. But the radio turned on by itself. We walked down the hall together and turned it off before going back to the living room. A few minutes later, it comes back on. Same thing, we go down the hallway to turn it off, but this time I unplug it. We head back to the living room and try to settle in for the night, and the radio comes on again. This time we didn't get up, because I unplugged the frickin' thing. There was no way it's on. I hollered down the hallway asking whatever was messing with us to turn the radio off. Instant silence. We checked in the morning, the radio was still unplugged. After that, we decided it was time to move, so we left. The place is still haunted to this day, and has a very dark feeling about it as soon as you come in the door.